The roar inside the Long Beach arena felt like thunder trapped under steel beams. It was early June 1972, and the air hung thick with sweat, liniment, and raw anticipation. 15,000 seats, most of them filled, pulsed with the kind of energy that only comes when something historic is about to unfold. Not just another tournament. This was the International Karate Championships, the proving ground where styles collided, egos clashed, and reputations were forged in sweat and impact. Out on the mat, under the glare of harsh lights, a boy who looked more like a Scandinavian god than a teenager stood victorious. Dolph Lundgren, 6'5", 215 pounds of coiled muscle and blonde ambition. At just 15 years old, he had done what seasoned fighters twice his age dreamed of. He had stormed through the heavyweight division and dropped the reigning champion with a second-round knockout that left the man needing medical help. The crowd was still buzzing, half in awe, half in disbelief. A kid from Sweden had just rewritten the rules of what was possible. You could see it in the way he carried himself. Shoulders back, chin high, that pale Nordic frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the sea of darker, more compact fighters who had dominated American karate circuits for years. His muscles told a story of brutal, dedicated training most teenagers never touched. Hours upon hours of heavy bag work, conditioning that pushed the body beyond what nature usually allowed at that age. Kyokushin karate had forged him into something formidable, a full-contact style that prized toughness and knockout power over polite point fighting. And on this day, in this arena south of Los Angeles, that style had spoken loudest of all. The martial arts world in America was exploding in those days. Bruce Lee's television appearances and the growing hunger for anything exotic and powerful had pulled karate, kung fu, and countless other disciplines out of back-alley dojos and into the mainstream spotlight. Ed Parker, the visionary behind these championships, had turned what started as a modest local event into an international spectacle. Fighters came from everywhere, drawn by the promise of real stakes. Full contact in the heavier divisions. Judges who let power speak. Victory here didn't just earn a trophy. It could launch careers, open schools, sell books, and turn unknown warriors into household names. Dolph stood at the center of it all, chest heaving, sweat glistening under the lights. The heavyweight trophy felt almost small in his massive hands. Around him, officials moved with a mix of excitement and unease. This wasn't just any winner. This was a prodigy who had dismantled grown men with a ferocity that seemed impossible for someone so young. His reach, his power, the way his low kicks and straight punches landed like sledgehammers, it all painted a picture of raw, undeniable talent. But there was something else in his eyes, something sharper than simple pride, a hunger that went beyond the win. Spectators leaned forward in their seats. Martial artists in the crowd studied his stance and technique, whispering about the future of the sport. Families cheered for the underdog story. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, sensing a breakout narrative. The Viking invader who had conquered America's biggest karate stage. Word had already spread through the stands about his background, training in the rigorous no-nonsense Kyokushin tradition, a style forged in Japan that demanded fighters absorb punishment as readily as they delivered it. Dolph had embraced that philosophy completely. To him, it wasn't just a martial art, it was truth in motion, the ultimate test of a warrior's spirit. As the applause thundered on, he didn't retreat to the sidelines like protocol suggested. Instead, he lingered at the center of the mat, eyes scanning the VIP section where legends sat. His expression hardened. The adrenaline from the knockout still coursed through him, mixing with the confidence that comes from proving doubters wrong in the most public way possible. He had heard the murmurs all weekend, older fighters dismissing his youth, questioning whether his size gave him an unfair edge, wondering if his power would hold up against true masters. Now, with the heavyweight crown in his grasp, those doubts felt distant, almost laughable. The arena's energy shifted subtly as officials hesitated near the microphone. Tradition allowed champions a few words, a chance to thank their teachers and honor the sport. But something in Dolph's posture suggested he had more than gratitude on his mind. The crowd sensed it too, a crackling tension beneath the celebration. This young giant, with his striking features and commanding presence, seemed ready to push beyond the victory. He had come to Long Beach not merely to compete, but to declare something larger about the hierarchy of fighting itself. In the broader world outside the arena, America was changing. The early 1970s crackled with reinvention. Old traditions were being challenged, new heroes emerging. Martial arts represented that shift perfectly. Disciplines once seen as foreign and mysterious, now capturing the imagination of a nation hungry for strength, discipline, and something authentic in an uncertain time. Dolph Lundgren in that moment embodied the new wave, young, bold, unafraid to question the established order. He reached for the microphone. The arena fell into a charged hush, thousands leaning in as if drawn by an invisible force. What happened next would ripple far beyond the Long Beach arena, forcing the entire martial arts community to confront uncomfortable questions about talent, respect, and the true meaning of mastery. The boy who had just conquered the heavyweight division wasn't finished. He was only getting started. And in the VIP seats, one man watched with quiet intensity, a figure whose own journey had already reshaped fighting forever. The stage was set for a collision no one could have scripted. Yet, as Dolph Lundgren gripped the microphone, the weight of the moment seemed to fuel him rather than humble him. His voice cut through the arena like a blade, clear, accented, carrying the unmistakable edge of absolute certainty. He wasn't here just to accept praise. He had come to declare a new order. "I didn't travel across the ocean for a trophy," he began, his words echoing off the rafters. The crowd, still buzzing from his knockout victory, leaned in closer. "I came because this is where the best are supposed to be. But what I've seen, it's not what I expected." A ripple of surprise moved through the stands. Tournament officials shifted uncomfortably near the edge of the mat. They had seen confident champions before, but this teenager carried himself with a conviction that bordered on defiance. Throughout the weekend, whispers had followed him like shadows. Between matches, he had spoken loudly about the supremacy of Kyokushin karate, its brutal full-contact roots, its emphasis on real power over polite technique. Other styles, he claimed, were soft. American approaches were flashy but hollow. Traditional forms and point fighting? Little more than dance routines for those afraid of genuine combat. Now, with thousands watching and cameras rolling, he doubled down. His broad shoulders squared, sweat still drying on his skin, he painted a picture of a martial arts world that had lost its way. "True fighting isn't about looking good or scoring points," he said, voice rising with the fire of youth. "It's about who can take the hit and keep going, who can end it when it matters. Kyokushin tests that. Everything else, entertainment." The words landed like body blows. Some spectators cheered the raw honesty. Others exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the gracious speech of a champion honoring his opponents. This was a declaration of superiority from a boy who had barely begun shaving. His pale features flushed with adrenaline, those striking blue eyes scanning the arena as if daring anyone to contradict him. The physical advantages were undeniable. His towering height, the dense muscle earned through punishing training regimens in Sweden. But it was the psychological armor that made him truly formidable. He believed every word, and belief like that can move mountains, or topple them. What few outside his inner circle knew was how deeply this mindset had taken root. Back home, Dolph had thrown himself into Kyokushin with an intensity that set him apart even among dedicated students. The style's founder, Mazoyama, preached a warrior ethos forged in bone-breaking reality, full power, no gloves, no excuses. Dolph had absorbed it all, training through pain that would break lesser athletes. By 15, he had already developed the kind of knockout power that turned heads and ended fights quickly. His recent victory here in Long Beach only confirmed what he had long suspected. His path was the right one, the only one. As the cheers mixed with murmurs of discomfort, his confidence swelled. He dismissed concerns from officials earlier in the tournament with a wave of his hand. When seasoned fighters offered advice or suggested he temper his boasts, he saw it not as wisdom but as fear. Fear of a new generation that refused to bow to tradition. In his mind, the fragmentation of martial arts had created too many illusions. Tournaments like this one, with their rules and divisions, finally stripped those illusions away. and he had emerged on top. The arena's atmosphere thickened. 3,000 people, from hardcore practitioners analysing every footwork detail to casual fans hungry for spectacle, felt the shift. This wasn't just a victory speech anymore. It was a manifesto. Dolph spoke of the difference between those who trained for real confrontation and those who performed for crowds. His own knockout, the way his opponent had crumpled under precise, devastating strikes, stood as living proof. Size, strength, unyielding spirit. These were the true measures. Everything else was theatre. Yet beneath the bravado, a more complex young man flickered into view for those paying close attention. Dolph wasn't cruel by nature. He was a product of singular focus in a competitive world that rewarded dominance. Growing up in Sweden, far from the bustling American karate scene, he had trained in relative isolation, absorbing a philosophy that left little room for doubt. Victory reinforced it. Defeat was simply fuel for harder training. At 15, with the world watching and his body performing like a machine built for war, humility felt like weakness. Why bow when you could stand taller than everyone else? His gaze drifted toward the VIP section again. There sat icons of the art, men whose names carried weight far beyond any single tournament. Dolph's expression tightened. He had come expecting to measure himself against the best, and in his mind the gap was wider than anyone wanted to admit. The microphone felt like a weapon now, amplifying not just his voice but the convictions that had carried him this far. The officials moved closer, sensing the speech veering into dangerous territory. But Dolph wasn't finished. His words carried the raw passion of someone who had just proven himself against the heaviest hitters in the division. He spoke of real combat versus controlled demonstrations, of power that couldn't be faked on a movie set or in a choreographed exhibition. Each sentence built upon the last, constructing an argument as solid in his mind as the muscle on his frame. The crowd was captivated, torn between admiration for the young champion's achievements and growing unease at the audacity on display. Here was a boy who had conquered the heavyweight class, yet he seemed hungry for something larger, a validation that went beyond trophies and rankings. His arrogance wasn't born from nothing. It was forged in the fire of legitimate success. But success like that, at such a young age, can blind as easily as it illuminates. As the tension in the arena coiled tighter, Dolph's final words hung in the air, heavy with challenge. The Viking Prodigy had drawn a line in the sand, right there on the championship mat. And across that line stood questions that could no longer be ignored, questions about legacy, about truth in fighting, and about what happens when unyielding confidence meets something it cannot simply overpower. In that charged silence, all eyes turned toward one man in particular. The collision was no longer coming. It had arrived. In that charged silence, all eyes turned toward one man in particular. The collision was no longer coming. It had arrived. Dolph's voice rose again, cutting through the heavy air like a challenge thrown at the gods themselves. I came here because I heard about Bruce Lee, his demonstrations, his movies. Impressive, sure, but that's not fighting. That's performance. The words landed like a gauntlet. 3,000 people drew a collective breath. The VIP section, where legends and honoured guests sat, seemed to freeze. Dolph didn't stop. I want to know if Jeet Kune Do can stand up to real pressure, not stage scenes, not partners who know what's coming. Real contact. One round, full power. Let's see what's real and what's show. The arena erupted. Gasps, shouts, a surge of noise that rolled like a wave across the seats. This wasn't a victory speech anymore. This was a public declaration of war from a 15-year-old who had just knocked out a grown champion. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled for better angles. Tournament officials rushed toward the mat, faces pale with alarm. They had built this event as a celebration of martial arts unity, a bridge between cultures and styles. Now a Swedish teenager was threatening to burn that bridge in front of the entire community. But Dolph stood unmoved, microphone firm in his grip, his massive frame radiating the same unyielding confidence that had carried him through the tournament. He painted the picture vividly, his own knockout victory as proof of Kyokushin's superiority, his youth no excuse but an advantage, his training forged in honest combat rather than theory. Bruce Lee talks about practicality, about what works. I'm offering the test right here, right now. 1 round, no pads, no choreography, just 2 fighters finding out the truth. The tension crackled like electricity. In the stands, martial artists who had trained for years exchanged stunned looks. Families who brought their children to witness excellence now wondered if they were about to see something ugly. Media crews, sensing the story of a lifetime, leaned in closer. This was the kind of moment that could define careers, or destroy them. A boy barely old enough to drive had just called out one of the most recognizable figures in martial arts on his home turf. Bruce Lee sat calmly at first in the VIP area, his presence magnetic even in stillness. He had come as a guest to demonstrate and inspire, not to brawl with teenagers. His journey from Hong Kong to Hollywood had already revolutionized how the West viewed martial arts, blending efficiency, philosophy, and raw expression into something alive and personal. Jeet Kune Do wasn't about rigid styles or proving superiority. It was about freedom, adaptation, using what worked and discarding the rest. Yet here was this towering young fighter, fresh from victory, framing it all as theatre. Officials reached Dolph, hands gesturing urgently for the microphone. Liability concerns flashed through their minds, insurance, lawsuits, the reputation of the entire championships. One wrong move, and this celebration could become an international incident. But the teenager's size and resolve made forcing the issue risky. He shrugged off their attempts with surprising calm, pressing forward. If it's as effective as he says, what's the problem? I'm 15 and I just proved my style against real opponents trying to take my head off. Let's see if the philosophy holds up when someone's actually coming for you. The crowd was torn. Part of them thrilled at the audacity, the raw, unfiltered energy of youth challenging the established order. Another part felt deep discomfort. Respect for elders and seniors ran deep in martial arts culture, a thread connecting practitioners across continents and generations. Dolph's words, while born from genuine belief, crossed into territory that felt disrespectful, even dangerous. Yet his recent performance gave him credibility. You couldn't dismiss someone who had just dismantled the heavyweight field so convincingly. Bruce finally rose from his seat. The movement was smooth, unhurried, yet it commanded the entire arena. Whispers spread like wildfire. Was he actually considering this? The noise swelled again, a mix of excitement and nervous energy. Officials hurried to intervene, speaking in low, urgent tones to both men about safety, about consequences, about the spirit of the event. Dolph dismissed the worries with a sweep of his hand. He says martial arts should be honest. I'm offering honesty. If he says no, everyone understands why. The weight of the moment pressed down. This wasn't some back-alley challenge. It was happening under bright lights, in front of witnesses who would carry the story far beyond Long Beach. Bruce listened quietly, his expression steady. Those who knew him recognized the controlled intensity beneath the calm, a mind that had spent years exploring the edges of combat, stripping away what didn't serve truth. He had faced skepticism before, doubters who mistook his fluid philosophy for weakness. But this was different, a public platform, a young fighter whose confidence came from real sweat and real victories. After a brief, tense discussion with officials and a quick waiver to protect everyone involved, the parameters took shape. 1 round. Roughly 2 minutes or until clear dominance. Full contact, but with some restraint on head strikes given the age difference and the unplanned nature of it all. The mat was cleared. The crowd leaned forward as one. 3,000 hearts beat faster, the carnival energy of the tournament transforming into something sharper, more primal. Dolph assumed his stance at the center, low, solid, rooted in the Kyokushin tradition that had served him so well. Hands ready, eyes locked with focus. His body, still warm from the earlier battle, looked like a weapon carved for this exact purpose. Bruce approached with that signature relaxed posture, almost casual, yet every movement radiated readiness. The contrast was striking, the towering, muscular teenager versus the smaller, more compact legend. Size versus experience. Raw power versus refined understanding. The arena held its breath. What had begun as a championship victory speech had spiraled into a moment that would test far more than fighting styles. It would probe the depths of ego, the boundaries of respect, and the uncomfortable space between what we believe about ourselves and what reality reveals when truly tested. As the two men faced each other under the lights, the weight of expectations settled like a storm cloud. The Viking Prodigy had issued his challenge. Now the arena waited to see how the master would answer. As the two men faced each other under the lights, the weight of expectations settled like a storm cloud. The Viking Prodigy had issued his challenge. Now the arena waited to see how the master would answer. The referee gave the signal. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Dolph exploded forward with the same explosive intent that had ended his tournament final. A powerful low kick whipped toward Bruce's lead leg, designed to buckle and disrupt, followed instantly by a straight right hand thrown with every ounce of his considerable power. It was the combination that had worked all weekend, clean, committed, devastating. But Bruce wasn't there. The kick sliced through empty space where the leg had been a fraction of a second earlier. No wild leap, no dramatic spin. Just a small, economical shift that made the attack miss by inches. Dolph's punch followed, a sledgehammer launched with perfect Kyokushin mechanics, the kind of shot that had dropped grown men. It whistled past Bruce's head as the smaller man slipped aside, with timing so precise it looked almost lazy. 2 seconds gone. Nothing had landed. The crowd gasped. Dolph adjusted immediately. Years of hard training kicking in. He circled and fired another combination. Angles, power, pressure, techniques drilled to overwhelm anyone who dared evade the first wave. Each strike met the same result. Bruce moved like water finding the path of least resistance, never scrambling, never retreating dramatically, simply refusing to be where the power was aimed. His positioning was poetry in motion, economical and alive, turning Dolph's aggression into empty air. 4 seconds. Frustration flickered across the teenager's face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. His size, his reach, his proven knockout power. None of it was connecting. He committed harder, rushing forward in a flurry meant to overwhelm through sheer volume and force. It was the move of a fighter who refused to be denied, pouring everything into closing the distance and making contact count. That aggression created the opening. Bruce's hand flashed out in a single, direct motion. No wind-up, no telegraph, just pure efficiency. The strike landed with controlled precision against Dolph's jaw, enough to jolt the equilibrium, not enough to destroy. 7 seconds total had passed. The giant staggered backward. His legs, so solid moments earlier, wobbled. Not from a knockout blow, but from something more profound, the sudden realization that all his advantages had been neutralized by timing, positioning, and understanding that operated on another level. The arena exploded in a roar that shook the rafters. 3,000 voices rose as one, shock, awe, disbelief. The boy who had dominated the heavyweight division, the one who had publicly questioned everything Bruce stood for, had been touched in the blink of an eye. Dolph recovered his balance slowly, one hand instinctively touching his jaw. His eyes were wide, no longer burning with certainty, but filled with confusion and the first sharp sting of dawning truth. The roar gradually softened into a stunned hush as people processed what they had just witnessed. Not a brawl, not a spectacle of mutual destruction, a surgical demonstration that had ended almost before it began. Bruce stepped back, creating space, his expression calm and measured rather than triumphant. There was no gloating, no victory pose. He looked at the towering teenager not as a defeated opponent, but as a young man who had just run face first into the limits of his understanding. The officials hovered nearby, ready to stop things, but the moment had already resolved itself. The fight, if it could even be called that, was over. Dolph stood there, chest heaving, the weight of the crowd's attention pressing down on him. His massive frame, which had commanded the mat all weekend, suddenly seemed vulnerable. The muscular build earned through relentless training, the height that gave him every physical edge, the knockout power that had felled an adult champion. None of it had mattered. In 7 fleeting seconds, the foundation he had built his confidence upon had been gently but unmistakably cracked. The silence that followed felt heavier than any cheer. Cameras kept rolling. Spectators whispered among themselves. This was the kind of moment that would be talked about in dojos for decades, the day a prodigy met a deeper truth. Dolph's face showed the internal storm, the clash between what he had believed so fiercely and what had just happened. His breathing was ragged, not from physical exhaustion, but from the emotional weight of having his worldview challenged in the most public way imaginable. Bruce spoke first, his voice carrying clearly across the mat. He addressed the young fighter directly, without mockery or condescension. He acknowledged the legitimacy of the Kyokushin victory, the genuine dedication it represented, the remarkable achievement of a 15-year-old standing over seasoned competitors. But he also pointed to something larger, how tournament success, no matter how impressive, tests specific things under specific conditions. It doesn't encompass everything fighting can be. It doesn't prepare you for every kind of opponent or every kind of approach. Dolph listened, his usual fire tempered by the shock still coursing through him. "I don't understand," he said, voice cracking slightly with the raw honesty of youth. "I had every advantage, size, strength. I just knocked out a grown man. But nothing worked. You weren't there when I struck. How?" The question hung in the air, vulnerable and human. In that moment, the arrogant champion who had dominated the microphone minutes earlier gave way to a boy confronting the gap between his experience and a much broader reality. The crowd watched, transfixed. This wasn't just about who won or lost a quick exchange. It was about the painful, necessary process of growth, the kind that strips away illusions and leaves something stronger in their place, if you're willing to face it. Bruce's response was patient, educational, rooted in the philosophy that had guided his entire path. He spoke of adaptation, of understanding context, of recognizing that true mastery involves knowing the limits of your own tools as much as their strengths. There was no humiliation in his tone, only the quiet authority of someone who had walked this road himself and wanted to light the way for the next generation. The arena, moments ago electric with confrontation, now hummed with a different energy. Reflection, realization, the kind of collective breath that follows a storm. Dolph stood a little straighter, though the sting of the lesson still burned. The Viking who had arrived in Long Beach as an unstoppable force was leaving with something far more valuable than another trophy. The seeds of wisdom earned through direct, unflinching experience. What happened in those 7 seconds would echo far beyond the mat, shaping not just one young fighter's path, but the way an entire community thought about confidence, respect, and the endless pursuit of truth in the arts. The demonstration had ended, but the real impact was only beginning to unfold.